structure for today is going to be Dr. Brown is going to kick this off with presenting some ideas and information, his vision, his thoughts about educational reform, but particularly about the use of technology, new media. And your job, and you may want to very well take out a piece of paper and something to write with, or get it from somebody next to you. Your job is, once he's done with the short presentation, or as he's presenting, you are to come up with a question or a statement. And we're going to whip around this room. You can pass. But a question or a statement in response to his presentation. And then when he's done presenting, pretty briefly, we will go around and just hear. And he's going to learn a lot from just hearing your questions, right, and hearing your statements. So get something to write with. And you can take out your cell phone, smartphone device, or pencil and paper, and be thinking about a question or a comment, or you can pass. And now we're going to turn it over to our superintendent of schools, Dr. Brown.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this. I need your help today. I haven't had a chance to sleep very much. And I'm hoping after this conversation I will be at a place where I can get a few hours in. Two things have been keeping me up. First, the weather. You know, I wish that I was as good as a weatherman, was able to predict what would happen with weather, but I haven't been able to do so. Because I cannot, it keeps me up at night. Just so you know, myself and Mr. Jim Ellis, who's our Director of Transportation, we're up every morning at about 2:30, 3 o'clock, assessing road conditions. We're talking to the National Weather Service, we're talking to public works folks on how roads are getting plowed, things that I thought I would never do. I got into this profession to teach young people how to read. I got into this profession to have conversations like this with young people. Never did I think I would be worried about how fast could they get salt down and how much salt needs to be on the street before it would start to melt the snow. But that's my life now, for some reason or another. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. What keeps me up at night is that when we're off, and we have these conversations every night, not just on nights when you're thinking that, and you're tweeting to me whether or not we're going to have school or not. We're having these conversations every night because every night something's happening on the thousands of miles of roads that we travel. I say these things to you to let you know that it's hard sometimes to get to the rich conversation that I want to have with you today about teaching and learning, because there's so much that's impacting our school district, us all. It's tough. The school and the weather conversations and whether or not becoming school is keeping me up. And I just want you to know. I don't know how much we can help you with that one. But this next one, I'm hoping you can. Our worlds are changing. Again, I said I got into this profession to teach young people how to read, how to have conversation. I wanted to engage in conversations like this. I wanted to affect educational policy. And I think about our work, and you may not be able to see what's up here right now. Everything I read, everything I see, when I see the young people I live with, my little girl, my little boy, when I look at what you're doing, we know that all the things that I was trained on how to implement and how to do are shifting. What happens in classrooms, what kind of opportunities we engage you in, how we set it up, staff development, what staff development looks like. All those things there, student-teacher interactions, how you learn, your brains have shifted. When looking at a picture of your brain compared to my brain, and I'm not much older than you. They look different based on what tools you have access to. Everything I thought I knew about teaching and learning in young people have shifted over the last 5 to 10 years. That's a fact. No longer is that as I think it is, there are people who are saying it might. Those things are facts. If those things have shifted, you may or may not have heard of the Common Core or the new curriculum. What's the state, what is the federal government, what are we as a Ithaca City School District asking you to do in our classrooms? And knowing what happens at this school, I know you do these things. What we put in front of you, the educational opportunities that we frame for young people are based in these verbs, based on these verbs. These verbs are the most common verbs in the Common Core curriculum. You're going to hear a lot about the Common Core. The Common Core is based on these things. We know that. That's tough work to frame opportunities for you. It's hard to get young people and adults to think and do these things, if you can see them. Collaborate, synthesize, analyze, communicate, etc. What's keeping me up at night though, along with the snow conditions and roads and plows, are the tools that you have access to now, that I didn't have access to, that weren't available just 3-4 years ago. These tools we know will allow you and allow us to do those verbs that were up there before. Collaborate, synthesize, analyze, communicate in ways that we haven't been able to do before. I told the story before being a superintendent, I was in charge of technology for a school district with 15,000 students, not long ago. And I was asked by the school board of education and the superintendent to put in place a digital locker. Put in place, do an RFP, here's an unlimited budget, a blank check, to go out and find a tool that would allow young people to store their work in the cloud, upload PDFs, upload MP4 files, to go to a paperless environment. I had conversations with the folks from Apple, Microsoft, Dell. At that time, Samsung was thinking about getting involved in this market, and no one could produce it. Just 4 years ago now. They couldn't create it for us. And now as I look at the tools that you have access to for free, Evernote does everything that RFP had, that RFP that we put out there for all these big companies to do. That RFP, Evernote meets all the requirements, and it's free. Here I am with $10 million to buy something, and couldn't buy it because it wasn't available, and now you have access to it for free. And for the folks who use Evernote or a tool like that, it allows you to communicate, collaborate, synthesize information, produce things in ways that are consistent with the Common Core. That could go on and on. I follow some of you on Twitter as I look around the room. I see what you write on Instagram. The way you write is different. And some of your parents think you don't like to write, but what you're writing is probably some of the best stuff I've ever seen written. The tools that are up here are allowing you to do things that we say we embrace. But what I also know is that many of our educators don't know or couldn't name 2 of the 7 of the tools that are on this screen now. What I do know is that in most of our classrooms, we as educators are unsure whether or not we want you to even take out your phones. Or we are providing you with the access to these types of things. So I'm struggling. Knowing that teaching and learning is shifting, knowing that your brains are different, knowing that tools are available now for free that we couldn't purchase 3 years ago with an unlimited budget. How is my job, how is educational policy going to shift? How should it shift? What do we need to be doing and thinking about differently to meet your needs? It's easy for folks like me to just sit in a room as part of a committee and come up with great ideas and start to do things. How much of that is informed by your thinking? You may tell me to get some sleep and stop worrying about this mess because it makes no difference. And I would love for you to tell me that. You may tell me I'm thinking about it all wrong. You may tell me something I haven't even heard of. But I'm here to hear from you. What would the idea look like you coming to school every day? What tools should be available to you when you walk in and sit down in one of our classrooms? What kind of interactions do you have or should you be having with your teacher? What you want to see with a teacher or an adult? I know I'm doing the part that they're supposed to be doing right now, but some of my thinking.
You've seeded some.
Some of my thinking around this, and it should be a blank slate. We should be designing an educational institution like the City School District based on what you need and what will engage you most. What will allow you to create and communicate and collaborate, analyze in ways that you want to. That's what I'm thinking. I have no answers. I'm just reading a lot of stuff, like your principal is. And I'm hoping you'll help inform the next step for our organization. And then also tell me when or when not to close school.
Now, let's hold on that one. We're going to take 4 minutes. And each of you right now is going to come up with a question or come up with a relatively brief statement. A statement in response to some of what Dr. Brown was asking, or a question in response to what you think Dr. Brown ought to be thinking about. So, take 4 minutes and come up with a question or a comment in response. We'll go around the room. You can pass, but I want everyone to work on this. Come up with a question. So speak it loud so everybody can hear. He's not going to respond right now, but he's going to be noting these, and we're just going to go around and hear all the questions and comments out before we open it up.
Okay, although using electronic tools can be very helpful, they can also draw your focus away from learning and completing work. What should the balance be between being plugged in and conventional learning?
I don't have a question, I have a statement.
Yep.
Is that okay? Okay.
Statements are okay.
It is common in our conventional educational system that teaching students how to learn becomes teaching students how to take a standardized test. Individual intelligence comes in many different forms, not just solely textbook knowledge. The term average can be quite limiting.
I just have a quick comment. I can tell from the early comments, questions, or statements that are coming up, and as I watch body language and how in tune and how engaged you are, it's clear to me, Dr. Brown, that this class exceeds many of our building level discussions with staff. So the level of questioning that folks are giving you already, I can tell that you're going to struggle with a couple already. So.
Terrific. Diane? You can pass.
I know that technology can assist learning, but also sometimes takes away from being socially healthy and talking to your friends face to face and social communication. So, how do you think that affects the students and the way they learn?
Sure. Great.
You've been talking about all these great things online. How are you planning on implementing them, getting students involved in them, use them, set up an account, things like that?
All right.
You're probably asked about this all the time, but your opinion on standardized testing also.
Standardized testing.
I don't have anything.
Yep. Pass.
Pass.
Marcy?
I was just going to say that your initial in the cloud description mirrors identically what I've been wanting as an online portfolio site since I started here. And some of the concerns that come up are around safety for the students, and particularly with family members. And it needs to be compatible with video, audio, and all forms of presentations and documents, and so far I haven't found anything that does that.
Thank you, Marcy. Yeah.
So I think that an important thing to think about when you're discussing technology is the accessibility. So I think it's very important whether you should think about if these should be mandatory or optional.
I was wondering about Transfolios, which is a social media. It was designed for the school system, and because, as people have expressed, a lot of these outlets have other distractions and like a social life in addition to a school life. So if you thought about them being separate entities or combined forces.
So, I was wondering what exactly is the Common Core and how it might affect ICSD.
We're going to come down here and then we'll go back to the back.
We have we have a library, we have resource rooms, we have computer labs, and so many classes today are saying, go type up this thing, there's Edmodo, there's this, there's all these things that we can use to share already, and we all have complete access to go check out a laptop and work on it in class if we need to. I'm just thinking, what more do we need?
Yeah.
So I'm also wondering about technology, and I know that one of the debates around it is accessibility and how useful and practical and conventional it is. But I'm also wondering about whether you have concerns over what type of thinking it might encourage and what type of ways of expressing and learning it might encourage people to develop, as opposed to other and more traditional modes of thinking and learning. And whether those are concerns of yours, and maybe whether they co-align with, or they align with how people's brains are developing now.
You have those concerns?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to try to make this brief. I'm just going to tell a story to start off. Over the summer, I was working at the summer school, the ICSD summer school, with first graders, trying to get them at a reading level to move on to second grade. And I was working specifically with an autistic kid, trying to help him. And he was one of the best readers in the class. That was not his need to learn how to read. He had other weaknesses, but one of the things that we would do is we would spend about 40 minutes each day plugging the kids into the computers doing, I think, the Imagine Learning program. And it was a program that's basically designed to teach kids how to read. And like I said, he was an amazing reader. He was like 4th grade level. And yet with this program, it had like a starting level entry test or whatever. And it did not work with the way his mind worked. And so they were basically showing a picture of a cat on the screen and saying, this is a cat. And it was so frustrating for me to watch him basically waste his time with that. I think that technology is a really great tool for learning, and it can be used, but only if it's used as a tool. And so I think my concern as soon as we start talking about technology in classrooms is that we're going to be just plugging kids into a cookie cutter kind of way of learning and forgetting about social interaction and the fact that every person's mind works differently.
You guys know this? You can do your, yes, you're up.
My personal opinion is that there's a huge social disconnect that technology has caused in our society. And so I guess what I seek is some way that technology can, instead of just being like throwing some iPads into a school, can be used really mindfully to increase social interactions instead of like replacing communication, actually putting people into real life situations where they're talking face to face, because that's something that you can't do no matter how good your Skype application is. I think that what's most important for me is getting kids out into the woods, out into the community, and being in real life situations. And I feel like there's certain ways that technology might be being used to like replace that. So I'm against just giving better computers and iPads and bringing all this technology into schools, because I don't think that that's really addressing the problem, which is kind of caused by technology in the first place, which is this like disconnect and kind of distance that technology causes, that you don't really like, you can't really point right at it, but it's kind of everywhere and it's kind of pulling people apart.
I agree completely with him, and I think that we should be using internet and our computers for like more classroom things, like submitting our papers and then having our teachers edit them and submit them back to us, and like using online resources for like different learning stuff, because I think we could save a lot of paper by doing that, and I think that is a thing that like kind of gets overlooked when we're talking about technology, about like really utilizing, like sending out like large readings on the internet instead of like printing them and stuff. So just like that kind of education.
I think that staring at a screen all day is not necessarily the best thing for a growing person's eyes, mostly. And just like everyone learns differently, and some people are really good with technology, other people cannot answer a phone call on an iPhone. And, you know, like separating those kids is just as bad as standardized testing, and it really doesn't solve anything. It just replaces.
So with the advancement of technology, face-to-face communication must also evolve, and how do you envision that evolution?
Basically just what everyone else has said. Just I feel that people often rely too heavily on technology, and you know, like what happens with that can be really detrimental to like social interactions and just like face-to-face.
Sure.
Okay, so if you do decide to go through with this like complete technological learning kind of era, what would your final goal coming out of that be?
Cool.
Well, so I missed the thing, so I didn't realize this was happening. Anyway, but what I have to say on the topic is kind of similar to what Alana said, is that if this is going to be a thing that's used in lots of schools, there needs to be a way to change it to an individual's like learning style, or else it's just not working very well.
You're a fan.
I agree with a lot with what Gabe and Sheila said, and especially about like doing papers online and not doing them online. I think that's a good idea. But also, I think technology causes just as many problems as it creates good things for learning. Like, I don't use any of these because I think they're a colossal waste of time, but other people do. I'm just curious how these could be used to learn in this week. You have to be really careful about that.
Keep going around, thank you.
So I kind of have a worry about people who don't have internet access at home or outside of school, and I think it would kind of be unfair to those people rather than to people who do have like internet and computers at home and have time to work on like other things with the programs that you will show us like in school. Then we would work on them outside of school, and those people who wouldn't be able to do that.
So I realize we're at a point in education where we're realizing that we need to get more innovative and think of new ways to learn and to teach, and that we don't want to place limits on students by putting them in a classroom all day when there's ways to access the world around them on such a large scale now with technology. But I think that can be done in other ways too. And I'm taking ecology, and I know some other kids are too. And we go on a field trip once a week, and we go to a site that expresses something we've been learning about in class, and to have that connection between something we've read about, talked about, and then seeing it in person, and to have that kind of first-hand experience with it, I think is really powerful, and maybe a more powerful tool for learning than technology. And so I'm also echoing this and agreeing with everyone about maybe getting kids outside more.
Yeah, I agree with that a lot, and so I guess just to put it briefly, my question is that, like, within all your thinking about how to be innovative and create new, like, learning traditions or whatever, have you given any thought to outdoor education? Like, I know there are a lot of organizations around Ithaca that provide really great opportunities for kids, and so I wonder if you've thought about that at all.
I agree with what Alana and Miranda said about how every person is really unique and learns in a very different way. So I guess my question is, how do you plan to use this technology and other resources to allow each person to learn in the way that best suits them?
I feel like technology is a great tool for education, but we need to know how to use it because many kids have different ways of learning.
I really agree with Alana and Gabe and Sheila, and a lot with Anna too, that I think that it's important to get people outside also. But I also agree a lot with Haley because I've had classes that expect me to do a lot of things online, and I don't always have internet access or a computer.
So I think that a problem that we sometimes face in this district because it's so big is that there's a lot of uncertainty between schools, especially going to this school especially. Like, there's a lot of bias in between the schools themselves, and I think that technology can sometimes help with that. Like the other day, like when we had that snow day, like I was at a rehearsal for Running to Places, and you like tweeted that we weren't gonna have school that day, and all the theater kids just started freaking out. They were so excited. They're like, "Oh my goodness, our superintendent tweets to us," and that made them really excited. And that kind of like creates like a feeling of sort of just, it makes us feel closer to you in some ways. Like that's sometimes really helpful to have teachers reach out in ways that we too are using. So I think that it can be really helpful socially, not necessarily between all of us individually, because that can like increase cyberbullying and stuff like that, but I think that especially between adults and students, it's really a really helpful thing to sort of have something in common that's sort of can make us feel a little bit less like, oh, we're like the bad little teenagers who the teachers think are like awful or whatever. I don't even know. I also think that technology can sometimes give more options to learning, which is really helpful because there's so many options out there that can give you, for someone whose mind works one way, can find different sites or different information, different formats that helps them best. So I think that it's sometimes, when you're in a classroom, there's one teacher who's trying to get that information out to you, and if that teacher's way of teaching you doesn't work, it can sometimes feel really trapped. And I've been in like especially math classes, which doesn't always come easily to me, sitting there just really uncertain, and I've been able to go home and look it up on the internet, and it makes sense to me instantly, just because for some reason the way that that random person from Wisconsin had phrased it made more sense. So I think that it can be really, really helpful, but I also agree with what a lot of people over here said about it should be used in moderation, because there should be a balance between technology and like environmental studies and going out into the world and stuff like that. So that's one thing I've really enjoyed about especially the school, is that we've been able to, you know, get new computers and iPads and stuff, but there's still the aspect of ecology classes, like going out and learning on things firsthand.
I was thinking of what kind of technology are we thinking about using? Are we thinking about like adding iPads to class or tablets or something, and more computers in class, or are we talking about certain apps that we use in classes or?
Okay.
So like Lucas said about the iPads, like I've only used those in one class for like 45 minutes, and I just don't feel like they're being used as much as they could be. So just wondering when they're going to be implemented more.
Okay.
I
I guess just in the rollout, you know, to have the hardware and all these fabulous online softwares is one thing, but then there's also this additional support that's needed by the students and the staff to properly engage them, you know, as opposed to just, oh, well, this is what you can do, isn't this slick? To get that depth of how it actually enhances the teaching and learning is where my questions still remain.
My head is spinning. I wish to propose something. How often does this group meet?
Twice a week?
Twice a week.
Well,
WHAM is once.
WHAM is once.
So there are a lot of good.
I wish to come back. I heard some things. I heard the why, the what, and the how. You want to know about all those. I want to come back and share my thinking with 35 minutes. I promise. In 35 minutes, I will roll out the why this is important, why we should be having this conversation, what's going to happen, what kind of tools, and more about the how and support, if that's okay. And we can do that in a week, 2 weeks, or whenever you want. I'm looking forward to that conversation because we can't do it justice in about 7 minutes. But I want to leave you with something to think about in the meantime. I heard you say we're at a point in education, at a point in history and education. In my spare time, I'm a bit of a historian, and you're right. We're at a point in educational history right now that's only occurred one other time. And that time was several hundred years ago. We're at the same place. What's being written, what's being said, the exact same place about a piece of technology. I'm talking about transforming education right now. And yes, that's a tough conversation to have. It was happening several hundred years ago. And they were talking about a piece of technology then. They were talking about what is it going to look like if we don't have all young people with one teacher who's imparting knowledge? What will happen if we don't really have to be in school to learn? What happens when you can take a piece of technology home and actually learn from it? What happens to the social aspects? What happens to one's eyes if they're going to be staring at this piece of technology for hours on end? Back then, the conversation was about the book. It changed the power structure. It changed history. A piece of technology, and I can go back. Aristotle, there were a bunch of folks who were writing about how bad it was. How dare we put this piece of technology in the hands of a female, a person of color, someone who wasn't wealthy? What about the equity issues around this? If so-and-so has it, if Thomas Jefferson can have it, why can't someone else have it who's a slave? If we would just, everywhere I go, I hear people talk about technology, and they're thinking about an iPad or an app. And what I'm proposing, and what I'm saying to folks is, we're having the wrong conversation. We need to have a deeper conversation about good teaching and learning. What it is that we want to do. I'm going to go there when we come back. And then talk about how today's iPad was very similar to yesterday's book. Today's Evernote app is very similar to the pencil that you're using right now, which was also called a piece of technology. And I have a quote from a world-renowned educator from the 1930s who said, we should not give every child a pen because that's a luxury that we can't afford. It was educating. So we're at a place in history. And the pen, the book, I would say to you, changed the world. It changed the makeup of your brain. The book, Nicholas Carr, in his book, The Shallows, talks about pieces of technology that changed the physical makeup of the brain. The clock, the book, and now the internet. It happened. People all of a sudden had to go places and be there on time. That changed some things that were occurring in your brains. Things were starting to make sense and connect that didn't connect before when you had to be someplace based on a time. The clock changed. The book changes for obvious reasons, and now the distractions and the way your brains are interacting on multiple screens, multiple pieces of writing, how you write, how long you can focus, has changed the way your brain works. So when we come back, we're going to talk about the why. We should be having conversations about the technology tools that are available to us today. Because whether or not we like it or not, it's here, and it's changing. Gone are the days where I can say as superintendent, we're not going to put technology tools in front of young people. You just put them in your pocket and use them anyway. The how we plan to transform in this age, and what will the tools look like going forward. 2 years ago, Apple, the folks from Apple were saying the iPad was going to be the tool that changed education. Now folks are saying it's the Chromebook. And in the next 6 months, there will be another tool. So we can't have conversations about the tool so much as what is it that we want to do with them.
If we've just got
Sure.
2 minutes, but if you would permit me to ask you, what did you hear when you were here? What are you walking away from this experience hearing as the themes?
And I'm gonna be real, I think we're all friends in here now, the door is closed. You've been scared by adults more so than I thought. Your parents, what you read, educators, we've been in very explicit ways or unexplicit ways, you've been sort of putting in your heads that you should fear this thing called technology. When we don't have a common understanding of what technology is. And I was guilty of it when I was teaching. The internet was just coming on board in the early 1990s. And I was saying to kids, I don't know about this internet thing. And then they would go home and talk about it with their parents, and it was sort of outlawed in my school. And we had one computer in the entire school that had internet access, because we as adults didn't know what to do with it. So from what I'm hearing, and you may not agree with me, but when I hear some of the things you're saying when you refer to technology, or the fear, or the social interactions have changed. I've taught online classes. Some of the best discussions I've ever been a part of have happened in an online environment. Folks have gotten to know one another in ways that they would not have gotten to know one another had we been in a classroom with four walls. Young people were speaking and speaking up in classes who had never talked in a class before. From my perspective, that was an enhancement on the social aspects. And some folks saw that, don't see it that way, but for me, I see it as an enhancement.